judging from the questions that little sister has for Uncle Odd, it was clear that he had a very interesting and varied life up to that point in time. But one thing stands out about Uncle Odd. He had certainly had his share of adversity over the years. He lost his eye in some kind of accident, and then he had this horrendous railroad accident that cost him his legs. And thereafter, he was overly reliant and dependent on his arms and his hands for getting around, even for walking. And of course, he took part in all the local worship and other community activities that were held in his neighborhood. But the fact that he endured adversity is something that really stands out. And I want to come back to that a little later. But let's talk about little sister. Little sister has this strange tendency of beginning to ask Uncle Odd a question, and then, without waiting for him to respond, chiming in and saying, I know the answer already. Of course, she was depending on the local gossip. So she was depending on secondhand reports and things that she had heard, and didn't give Uncle Odd the chance to answer the questions. This reminds us that sometimes we have a tendency to think we know it all, and to not allow the persons that we're thinking about or we're considering to have their own opportunity to share their story. We don't always know the whole story. We certainly don't always know the specific details, and we need to be persons who are open to other persons sharing their own story in their own way. There's a classic mistake that is often made in terms of human relations and in race relations, and that is to prejudge and stereotype people and to think that we know their story and we can speak for them. Well, I think that this story brings to mind a couple things. One is, it's abundantly clear that it's important to listen to others. And, listening is a major step towards empathy. And empathy is a significantly important quality we all need to have. And we don't need the psychologists to tell us that, though they do tell us that. We don't need the politicians to tell us that, though they're speaking a lot about that these days. But empathy is so important, and listening is a fundamental step towards empathy. Now, Jesus thought enough about us, human beings, that through the incarnation, he sympathized and empathized with us. As it says in Hebrews 4:15, that we have a great high priest who is able to be touched with the feeling of our infirmities and who sympathizes with our weaknesses. So if we follow the example of Jesus, we would realize the importance of acting with empathy and remembering that empathy goes beyond merely the feeling of it. Empathy is something that goes towards doing and acting and making a difference. The second thing about this story is that Uncle Odd, with all his adversity that he suffered, nevertheless was a man of faith. You'll remember that in the story, Raggy Rain says that he would be in church and he would be praising the Lord, unreservedly expressing his trust in God and praising God, despite the fact that he had endured so much. And in fact, the people of his community marveled that he had maintained his faith despite all that he had experienced, the loss of his eye, the loss of his legs, his disability, the declining economic circumstances that we know about, because the story tells us that his house was collapsing in on itself, and therefore he was in some kind of economic decline, financial problems. Despite all of that, he never ceased to praise God. And that's something that is so valuable, because when you think back, we think to our forebears, we think of people who over the centuries, over the generations, have never ceased to trust God, even when they've endured suffering and pain and sorrow, and even when, as a group, they've had oppression and setbacks to deal with. So faith not only enables us to endure the personal problems that we face, but faith actually is one of those things that enables us to renew our commitment to truth and justice and peace. And I pray that the story will help us to do those things as we learn from Uncle Odd and his various experiences. Thank you.